Citizens of the world, welcome back to another Keep Yours podcast where we try and keep a few extra dollars in your wallet so you can spend them on the things you like to. Today, right after I just got done with the podcast on inflation and how bad that can be for an economy, and showing Argentina as the example of runaway inflation, basically because of a socialist government who's in charge of money printing and they just keep printing money. Lo and behold, I wake up and find in the newspaper that they're talking about the digital dollar. Why central banks want to create their own digital currencies like Bitcoin. And despite this coming out of the Wall Street Journal, which I thought was a conservative newspaper that was about small government, and this being the largest encroachment ever by government, they really downplayed the potential downside of the digital dollar, right? Because when we think of digital, you're thinking of, I can conduct transactions digitally. That would be good. But you can already do that. We have private vendors handling that. You can download the Cash App or Venmo or PayPal. And there are private ways that you can move money easily. And as these become more adopted, there will be easier and more transfers of the system. But what frightens me about this is what they're really trying to do behind it. And I'm going to do a deep dive on this in the future to show everyone all of the details from the IMF and exactly how they're going to set up to try to steal your money. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to use this as a nice little excuse to say, hey, you see from COVID, we have to be able to give money to people very quickly, and sending out stimulus checks takes a long time, and we want it to be faster. And everyone thinks, the government giving me more free money, I want that to happen faster too. And somehow everyone's decided this is a good idea. They ignore that you're basically going to allow the government into all aspects of your financial life. And we really are going to say we don't understand the repercussions of this, right? So if you look at every government program, then you need to look at the unintended consequences of it. And if you look at the current situation we're in right now, in which we have massive bubbles that end up being created by government policy that tends to do the opposite of what they intend it to do, then you start going, maybe we should ask a few more questions before we just decide we're going to let the government do some really crazy things, because what are the unintended consequences? And if you want some examples of that, here's one. When the economy gets bad, the government likes to lower interest rates. And they like to say that the lowering of interest rates is good for everybody and helps the economy get back on its feet. And while that may have been true when interest rates were 10, 11, 12%, when interest rates are 5 or 6 or 7% and they lower them even more, this does not help most Americans. In fact, what it actually does is the opposite. So they want to create spending. But if you're a retiree about to retire, and you've been anticipating that you could get a 5 or 6% return on your government bond, basically in safe money, but now all of a sudden you're going to get 1%, then you're not going to spend more money. You're going to spend less. And therefore, as the government drops interest rates, when they don't see more money circulating quickly, they go, well, why didn't it happen? Because the unintended consequence is that people who are saving and trying to retire are getting less income from that money, and therefore they are now incentivized to save even more, slowing down the economy even more. The other thing that happens with this as a nice unintended consequences is it makes assets much more expensive. And this creates the bigger divide that we see as the huge problem of inequality. Therefore, those with assets get richer because those assets become more expensive. And if you're a home buyer, this is very simple. Every percentage point of interest that you get to reduce your interest rate basically saves you 10% in purchasing power. So if a house costs $200,000 and you have a 10% interest rate, you can only afford a certain payment because the interest expense is so much of that payment. As interest rates reduce, you can afford more. So housing prices can rise. And this is exactly what we've seen over the last 20 years. Interest rates falling, prices rising. That makes it harder for people to save up enough money for a down payment because now assets are so expensive. So it does the opposite effect of what we want. We want to reduce inequality, interest rates dropping, only helps rich people get richer. It makes their assets worth more because borrowing becomes cheaper. But who gets to borrow? Only the people with good credit. So it does the opposite of what we want. These are unintended consequences. Now, if we let the government take over all of the banking system, which the digital dollar is a slippery slope to the central banks being your sole banker, right? And it's already hard enough for banks to make money, but now all of a sudden, if they're competing with the federal government, how are they going to compete? So they're going to say that we need to transfer money to people quickly. So we need a digital dollar and everyone needs an account with the Fed. This is not true and we don't need it. And let's talk about why. First, let's talk about transfers to begin with, because in many ways, these don't make any sense, right? So we give our government money in taxes. And then all of a sudden in a pandemic, they're going to give that money back to us. So are they giving it back to us because they collected too much? Because they haven't spent enough, and they've got plenty of money. So they're saying, hey, we could just give money back to you. If they were going to give that money back to you in the future, wouldn't they just reduce your tax rates? Oh wait, we already did that. So Trump reduces tax rates, and now we're sending checks to people, even though we've reduced the tax rate. But aren't they going to have to collect more money from us in the future to pay for all of the things right now that they currently don't have enough money to pay for? We just ran the largest federal deficit ever, and we want to give people more checks. So the government is supposed to provide services with our money. Now it's going to give us back our money. So either it's got to provide less services or it's got to then tax us more so that it can give me money back. And if it's why would you tax me more to give me money back? Let's turn this around. Employer-employee relationship. So an employer has employees work for them. And then at the end of each month or period, the employer pays the employees money. Have we ever seen a time where the employees turn around and go, you know what, boss? We know business is down, so we're going to go ahead and give you money back. Has that ever happened? Because that's the same thing. It's not going to happen. It never happens. It doesn't make any sense. We give the government our money. It shouldn't be giving it back. Now, I realize the government, part of their job is doing redistribution, which technically, according to the Constitution, sounds pretty illegal, but it's what they do. So I realize that half people pay zero in tax, and that those people get checks from the government, not pay into the government. So for those people, maybe they need a system, but they already have one. We already have a system set up to do this. If the government needs to write people checks, you give the government your banking information when you file your tax return, and they give you money back. This is how we adjust accounts with the government. We don't need a digital dollar to do this. This is just their excuse. And then what's going to happen once they do this? Stealing in plain sight, part 1, inflation. So I did an episode on inflation, a deep dive. Please go look at that one if you want to really try to understand inflation. According to Warren Buffett, 1 in a million people really understand inflation. So we have 336 million people in the country. So that means 300 people understand inflation. I only partially understand it. I understand the core concept of inflation, which is if they print more dollars, there's more money out there. But inflation is very complicated, especially when you're the world's reserve currency, because so many other countries use US dollars for their whole entire economy. And that makes it very, very complicated. And also, as I said earlier, unintended consequences. You lower interest rates, you would think that would prompt people to spend more. But if you're closer to retirement and saving, then it makes it feel like you need to save more because you're not going to get as high as returns. So there's all sorts of things, but inflation is stealing in plain sight. If we go to a digital dollar, then instead of Congress having to raise the debt ceiling all the time, instead of Congress having to balance its budget, which it should have to, they can continue to grow in any amount of deficit they want. And anytime they feel like it, they can just, with one click of the button, print money and put it into everybody's accounts immediately, and also force them to spend it. And when they do that, that is going to force inflation. And that is actually part of what they are trying to do. The digital dollar is a grand plan, by the IMF and central bank planners to steal all of our money and to give all of the control over our lives to the government. This is the opposite of what we want. We want freedom and independence from our government. It is supposed to serve us, we do not want to become beholden to the government, which is where this leads. So inflation is part one of what they're going to do. Digital dollars, they can enforce spending, and they can take the money out of your account if you don't spend it. So what's that mean? Everyone's going to go out and spend it. What's that mean? That we're going to have higher costs in goods. And just like they did in Argentina, and they've done it in the US before, and they will do it again, then they will put price controls on what you can charge for things. So while they're inflating one side, they're going to limit basically the amount of goods on the other, because a lot of people aren't going to provide those goods at a loss because it doesn't make any sense. They'll just close their business. So that's going to do the opposite of what they want. Yes, we'll have massive inflation. No, we won't have what we want, which is the goods to buy it. The second part of this is they're going to choose who gets money and who doesn't, just like the government did this year. So the government said this year, we're going to give everybody a $1,200 check. But if you made more than, and they picked a number, $100,000, then we're not sending you a check. Period. Now, we may, as a society, decide that's the right point at which we pay more in taxes. But my point is that the government gets to decide anytime they want who gets money. If they can do it based on an income amount, can't they do it on political affiliation? If you're a Democrat, you get $2,000 a month. If you're a Republican, while the Democrats are in power, you get $500, or you get zero. This is exactly what's happened in Venezuela. If you're part of the government and you support the government, you get digital Venezuelan currency every month. If you don't, you get nothing. We think that's not a reality in the US right now, but it very well could be. This is the slippery slope. Stealing in plain sight, number 2. Then the IMF literally has a document that I'm going to show you in a minute, and we'll go through in great detail when I do the deep dive on this. If you have cash, they cannot run rates negative on you. And the reason is you just take your cash out. And if you hold the cash, they can say that the rate is negative 3%, but they can't come physically take 3% of your cash. They can't take $3 out of every $100 you have if you have the money in cash, because you have it in cash. It's physical. But if all money is digital, then they can take whatever percentage they want whenever they want. And this is we're going to force people to spend money again. And this is a really, really, really good reason to have real money, physical gold and silver, instead of fiat currency. It's bad enough that we have fiat currency now, but fiat currency that's now digital, how are we supposed to know how much there is? They can change it with the click of a button. They could basically empty your bank account with one click because they don't like to, or they don't like you, or they don't like what you're doing, or they make a charge against you. So right now, if the government, let's just suppose you're doing nefarious things. Let's suppose that you're running a Ponzi scheme or a cult, and they actually need to seize your accounts. Well, right now they have to go through the courts to do so. And those banks are private institutions, and they will not do that without a court order. If in the future the federal government is in charge of all of the money, all somebody has to do is click a button, lock your account. The IRS decides you owe money. Boom, we just take it from you. No process, no due process required. We hand the government the keys to all of our banking with no institutions in between that promise us any amount of liberty. We don't have the ability to keep money literally under the mattress anymore. It's all in digital currency. Not a good design. But the part of this that is by design is the negative rates, because if you have cash, it doesn't work. So in the past, when credit cards started proliferating, you used to pull up to a gas station, and what you would see is if you paid in cash, they would give you a discount, because then they didn't have to pay the credit card fees. I deal with this with customers all the time. Hey, you just paid me by Amex. They're charging me 3.5%. Now, hopefully you're getting probably 2% of that back in you, but I have to charge you more in a price to cover that 3.5% from Amex. If you pay me in cash, I don't have to pay Amex 3.5%. So cash or check, I don't have to raise the price on you, right? This is what used to happen at gas stations all the time. Instead, what you're going to see, so they can get rid of cash, is the opposite. They're going to tax cash transactions, just like Argentina does. You want to deal in cash, aka in Argentina, that means US dollars. We're going to tax that transaction. So you're going to pay a premium to paying cash, which is the opposite of what we've always done, but that is what it is. So the negative interest rate only works if we can go to a digital dollar. And since they haven't been able to create inflation by lowering interest rates, except for in asset prices, they're going to continue to try and play this game by taking rates negative. Well, again, that doesn't work with cash. This is by design. They're literally designing a system to steal your money, to steal all of our money, because the governments haven't been able to do what they said they were going to do, which is trust us, we'll control the money supply, and we'll make sure that bad things don't happen. Instead, they've run up the largest amount of deficits with the largest amount of promises we've ever seen in our in any lifetime. You know, the amount of debt compared to GDP is World War II-like, except for the fact that after World War II, we were set up to have this great boom because we turned all of these factories into productive means by which they could sell people goods and grow GDP. Now we're stuck with the potential of no to low GDP growth, but massive debts. And that's going to be a problem for decades to come. And they don't want to deal with that, so they want to create large amounts of inflation. To do that, they probably have to run rates negative. It's a tongue twister, keeps getting me. So they need to have rates be negative to force people to try and buy things. Because if they're going to take your money, if you have $100 in the bank, and at the end of the year, if you don't spend it, they're going to take $3, then you're probably going to spend it on something that in the future you can sell. So there will be a rush to safe assets. At the same token, if they're going to charge negative interest rates, then that means they're going to pay you to borrow money. So once again, those with assets are going to do really well because you're effectively paying off a percentage of my loan for me. I don't even have to pay the money back. Meanwhile, there's also, you're trying to drive inflation, which means my asset prices are going to rise. So once again, this only helps wealthy people. If you're not rich or wealthy, this isn't going to help you. And that's going to be a lot of American citizens. So we need to realize this. The laws of unintended consequences, they're going to sell you on the idea that, hey, we'll put money in your account right away. They're not going to tell you they're going to steal it from you over the long term, which is exactly what they're going to do. So cash is also good for multiple reasons. It keeps your privacy, right? We have other apps to digitally transfer money. We don't need the government involved in all of our business. And the government cannot create growth. That needs to come. And the way that the banking system works is you go to the bank and you want a loan. The bank decides whether or not they believe you're going to be able to pay them back. And if the bank loans you money, that's how new money is created. If the government now is involved in this process, they get to decide all the winners and all of the losers. And that's bad for all of us because we don't want our government deciding who should get money and who shouldn't, because obviously they're going to help their cronies. So what frightened me in this article is that Powell said that the Fed must consider risks of cyber attacks, counterfeiting, and fraud. I don't know how there's counterfeiting of a digital dollar that the Federal Reserve is in charge of. That seems pretty ridiculous. So what he said was that this is what got me and made me do this podcast is we do think it is more important to get it right than to be first. That is not an if statement. That is a when statement. That is frightening. That means that they are going to do this. They're not asking for our permission. They're not asking if it violates the Constitution. They're not asking. They're saying we are going to do this and we want to get it right. Well, to get it right means that they shouldn't even do it. That's what's right. Because here's the IMF Working Paper, and here's the name of it. monetary policy with negative interest rates, decoupling cash from electronic money. And that document, available on the IMF website, is a roadmap to how to steal money from your citizens, how to create negative rates. And they acknowledge that if you have cash in your system, you can't do it. So we have to take cash out of the system. They go so far as to tell you to call the digital currency something so similar to what the current currency is that it will create confusion. So people will not know the difference between a digital dollar and a printed dollar. They will not realize that with a printed dollar, they can't take money from you. They can't run rates negative and take a percentage out of your physical bill. You can't take my $100 bill and take $3 out of it. I still have that $100 bill. It's still a $100 bill. But they want, if it's digital, if it's a digital bill, I have nothing. It's just on my phone and it's a picture of $100. And then all of a sudden, oh, you didn't spend it in the time. Beep. Time's up. Now it's $97. Gone. Just like that. They can do that. And not only can they do that, they have a game plan lined out to do it. How about federal government? You live within your means. You stop spending all of our money all of the time and stop spending our future. How about you can only spend the money that you actually collect and that we get a vote on how much the government gets to collect and what the government does? I'm sorry, that would be more like freedom. So what happens if the government's your bank? They get to see all of your transactions. And I'm sure, just like when they wrote the Patriot Act, that they promised will never be used against U.S. citizens, even though it gave the government the right to collect all of our information, which they did, illegally, as shown in multiple court documents since then. The Patriot Act was everything unpatriotic. Founding fathers would have rolled over in their grave. So the government will now, in your digital wallet, be able to see every transaction that you do. Do you really want the government scrutinizing every transaction you make? And remember, this depends on who's in power. So all of a sudden, Democrats are in power and they don't like guns. So every transaction that's been for a gun purchase, they know exactly who to come ask and exactly how much those amounts were and exactly what you bought, without having to go through the due process of the court system to go obtain those records from third parties, i.e. the stores that you bought them from, who won't readily give that information to the government, or credit card companies or banks. And again, you won't have the ability to pay in cash, so they'll know. So now they get to know what you spent it on, and then they get to make these things illegal. So what if they make porn illegal and you subscribe to a porn site? Now they'll see that and decide that, oh, that's illegal, and maybe they'll arrest you for doing something in the past that they make illegal in the future. We don't know. But what we do know is the more things we put the government in control of, the more things they screw up. And they get to decide what's in vogue and what should be illegal now, and all of a sudden apply those, whether proactively or retroactively. They now get to see that. So now you could just get a bill in the mail that says, you bought something that we deemed illegal. What if that was the case right now? Check this out right now. If we were all in the digital system right now, then all of the states that have legalized marijuana, because we realize that locking people in jail over a plant that grows out of the ground naturally might be a bad idea. The fact that the Supreme Court is too weak to stand up to our Congress, who makes laws that make plants illegal. So let me get this straight. A bird can fly a long distance. So let's say a bird eats some hemp seeds, flies over to my property that I have, and takes a dump. And in that dump is the seed of a hemp plant, and that hemp plant grows. And now I'm in violation of federal law for a plant growing out of the ground that grows naturally. Same thing could be with mushrooms. So mushroom spores are in the air. So now all of a sudden you have a cattle farm. And what do cattle do? They take big, huge cattle dumps all over the place. Then it rains, and if some of those spores happen to have flown into your pasture, and psilocybin mushrooms grow out of it, you're in violation of the law for something nature created on its own. And this makes sense. Meanwhile, the Bible tells us use all the plants and herbs to use. And so now states have come back and they've gone, look, this is bad for our citizens. These laws are terrible. The federal government will not fix them because there are too many entrenched people in place that have an incentive for hemp to be illegal. Cotton farmers don't want hemp to be legal. oil oil makers don't want hemp to be illegal because its biofuel could be used. The paper companies certainly don't want hemp to be legal because it's a whole lot cheaper than cutting down lumber to make paper out of hemp, since the Constitution was written on it, but it's currently federally illegal? Come on, people. So when states decide that the federal government has overreached, we decide, hey, we're going to do something about it. And we start state petitions and we put things on the ballot. And we say, hey, we're no longer going to criminalize marijuana transactions. And in fact, in Colorado, we're going to make it completely legal. We're going to tax it, and we're going to use that money to fund education and other systems. These are good things. Well, if we were all in the federal digital dollar, we wouldn't be allowed to do any of those transactions because they're federally illegal, which is why if you go into a shop right now, you have to pay in cash. You can't use a credit card because the credit card companies won't do it because it's federally illegal. So this is what happens when the government's in charge. They make laws that are illegal. How you make a plant illegal is beyond me. It seems absolutely crazy. But they've done it, and now the states have decided we're not going to deal with that. But if the federal government's in charge of your bank account, they can decide those transactions can't happen. And remember, there's no cash. So how do we get through this? We don't if the government's in charge. That's what just makes it a bad idea. Here's another thing. Cash helps a lot of people. Many charitable contributions are paid in cash. Spare change, a little bit from each of us, adds up to a lot. In fact, if you look at around the holidays especially, there'll be somebody out front ringing the bell, throw us your change in the 10, some loose change, a couple of dollar bills. That is half of their contributions from spare change. That's a lot. So we're preventing, in going all digital, from helping each other more easily. And ask any homeless person how they get their food. Most of the time it's spare change that people drop. How about musicians? Now we have to transfer digital dollars to everybody. And if you're homeless, what's the odds that you have the technology in your hand to handle digital transactions? So cash helps a lot of different ways that we don't think about. The ability to control what you can and cannot spend money on. Just like I just got talking about marijuana in legal states. If they can control your account, they can control your spending. They can limit it. They can decide you can only spend so much per month, and we're just going to take the rest from you in negative interest rates. So even if you want to spend the money, you can't. And you think that, the government has never put on these types of controls before. True. And they've never been in these kind of deficits that they need to pay. And here's the frightening part. The frightening part to me is that they change the rules whenever they want. So as different parties come to power, now all of a sudden different people can tell us what they do. I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican in office. I want my freedom. Freedom to do what I want without the government intervening. If I pay my taxes according to the rates that they've set for all, then the government should be out of my business when it comes to what I do with my money. I can give it to whoever I want. I can spend it on whatever I want. And I want no controls being put on that. And a digital dollar will do the opposite. It'll make the government in charge of all spending. Oh, you want to get approval for that transaction? Let me call the federal government and see if they're going to approve that transaction today. So now they can decide if your company can do business or not. Shut you down instantly. No transfers to that company. All companies will have to register. It's a slippery, slippery slope to the government being in charge of the entire monetary system, which is exactly what they want. Make no mistake, they want to be in charge of it. It's the last thing we need is for them to be in charge of it. Jerome Powell said if, not when. My fellow Americans, please do not allow Congress to shove through these digital dollar ideas under the nonsense of we need to get money to people faster. The government should not be in the business of sending checks to people on a constant basis for disasters. It just shouldn't happen. We shouldn't have calamities every other month the government needs to get involved in. The systems set up now are just fine. More government is not going to help us out. It will only cause problems. lots of unintended consequences, lots of power being concentrated in the hands of a few, which is the opposite of liberty. The Constitution gave the federal government the right to coin money, not to create money, digital or otherwise. They are long since past their legal rights now. This will make government in charge of everything financially. And if you want government in your life financially on every single space, then you don't believe in liberty. And America was founded on liberty. Taxation without representation was why the Revolutionary War was fought. Well, how can you be represented when they can just inflate money out of you? How can you be represented when they take rates negative and just decide they're negative? They're in charge 100%. And it's a slippery slope till some regime goes, we're going to use that, and we're going to use everyone's transactions, and we're going to pull everyone's data and use that against people. This sounds like a conspiracy theory. Talking about this makes me feel like I should be on some conspiracy theories podcast, or one of these people who overhypes everything, a Rush Limbaugh type, or so some other crazy person who's so crazy about what government's going to do. But this is real. This is actually happening. And if it was, it's like hidden in plain sight so that people don't think about it. Oh, digital. Yeah, we want everything digital. That sounds great. Especially you're a millennial. Done everything digital on the phone. That sounds great. Understand the consequences of what this means. Because it's hard enough already. Government's way out of control. So if you believe in liberty, please get involved. Know what's going on when it comes to the digital dollar, and know that it is a slippery slope to the government being in all of your business. And please just say no. Thanks for listening. Please pass this along. This is such an important topic that everybody needs to know about. So more important than the liking us and giving us reviews and all of that is share this information and get this out there, because we need to limit the power of our government, lest it take control over all of our lives. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.